When Picasso was a boy in these streets, Gaudi was at the height of his power. Gaudi died in 1926, aged 73. There were tens of thousands at his funeral. It was as if a saint had died. A figure of great simplicity, he'd been enormously revered. He left no money, he'd no use for money except to give it away, but he left behind him a cathedral on which he'd spent a lifetime and never finished, and some astounding buildings. After his death, the architects of Europe ignored and then forgot him, feeling that he'd got nothing to teach them. Gaudi had been regarded, in fact, for years simply as a crank, and not surprisingly. He built this house, remodeled it to be exact, in 1905. It was meant, apparently, to represent the story of St. George and the dragon, the roof being the dragon, the cross St. George, and the chimneys the dragon's claws. The work on the facade was there to represent the bones of the dragon's victims. When Gaudi took anything on, he insisted on doing everything. Furniture, furnishings, the lot. As a young man, he was a brilliant mathematician, said to be vain and the darling of society. But equally, right from the start, there were signs of the extreme religious insight and personal simplicity that were to mark his maturity. He built this convent in 1889, designing, as usual, everything, including the gates, a craft he'd presumably learned from his father, who was a coppersmith. These arches were based, incidentally, on a mysterious equation he had developed between the parabolic arch and the three persons of the Trinity. Catalonia is a remote and isolated province, traditionally cut off from the rest of Spain. This was Gaudi's country. As a young man, he worked as an associate architect in the Catalonian monastery of Montserrat, 40 miles inland from Barcelona. For the rest of his life, these curious, dripping rock formations, like other shapes from nature, were to be one of the persisting elements in his architecture. Art Nouveau, of all things, was one of the ingredients from which Gaudi had developed this odd, curious, uncomfortable work. Art Nouveau was a fashion in his early days, normally a prim and ladylike idiom, which in Gaudi's hands was turned to quite unique ends. These leaning, tree-like columns in the Santa Coloma chapel are not simply eccentricity. They represented an entirely new idea of what columns can be made to do. These are not only holding the roof up, but are doing so without need of buttresses, which Gaudi hated. All this, like so much else, was largely experiment for his cathedral. He was, in fact, an engineer of genius, nothing short. The use of natural shapes and engineering skill had combined to produce something quite unprecedented. He built viaducts, he built ceremonial arches, he built schools, and at the highest point of everything he built, it was a rule he never broke, he put a cross. This was originally one of two lodges for a housing estate. A policeman lives in one of them now and an ice cream vendor in the other. The housing estate was never finished and is now a park in Barcelona. Nature, he decided, had no room for straight lines, and what Gaudi had developed was an architecture without straight lines. This was originally meant to be the marketplace in the estate. The roof was to be a Greek theatre. This is the roof, now used as a playground and meeting place. All this was done in 1900, when Picasso was a boy in his teens and in fact living only 2 miles away. It's an extraordinary fact that the ultra-modern methods of surrealism and collage and so on that were to revolutionize painting almost a generation later were already being used by this isolated builder working entirely on his own in 1900. He pressed tiles, plates, whole dinner services, if he felt like it, into the wet concrete. His work became even more abstract in a block of flats called the Mila, with a breathtaking roof. He seems now to have been drawing on the action of the waves and the long sea shore. Inside the building, he put two large light wells, different in shape. This is the roof, and these are ventilators and chimneys which were designed to surround a huge figure of the Virgin, which never materialized. Virtually everything that Gaudi ever built was no more than an experiment for his Cathedral of the Holy Family, which he worked on all his life. What stands of the cathedral incorporates everything he stood for. The brilliant engineering, stone upon stone with never a reinforcement, the oddness, the abstractions, the structures with no architectural precedence whatsoever, the dripping stone, the art nouveau, the naive and almost medieval storytelling, the capacity to think on a stupendous scale. He planned 17 of these towers, the Christ Tower in the middle to be twice as high as the four now standing. This was his workshop. He hardly ever made drawings, kept no notes, built as he went along. What he did use were models, but his models were all smashed and burned in the Spanish Civil War. They've remade models of certain sections based on fragments they've been able to find. They keep doing so, desperately trying to discern from the bits that remain his lost and always unpredictable intentions. In his later years, Gaudi lived in this workshop, occasionally going out into the streets with every simplicity to collect alms for his church. They now have a partially completed reconstruction to work from, and their intention is to go on building the cathedral. Up above is what was to have been the nave, and the place where Gaudi is now buried. And overlooking the unbuilt nave, the portals and the towers, a curtain of stone enclosing nothing. But at that, a staggering reminder of what human genius can encompass.